If you stick your neck out in public, at least somebody notices, and if your head gets chopped off, that's a direct quote. A scientist named Amy Eskridge said that in 2020. She was 32 years old. She co-founded a research institute in Huntsville, Alabama, to study gravity modification, and she built it as a public entity specifically because she believed visibility was her only protection. 2 years later, on June 11th, 2022, she was found dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. She was 34. The Madison County coroner ruled it suicide. No investigative report was ever made public. 1 month before she died, she texted her business partner, Samuel Reed. The message read, "If you see any report that I killed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I overdosed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I killed anyone else, I most definitely did not." Her family says she suffered from chronic pain and depression. A retired British intelligence officer named Frank Milburn says she was murdered. A United States congressman says there is, quote, significant evidence she was targeted by a directed energy weapon. The FBI is now investigating. And 4 days ago, on May 8th, 2026, the United States government launched the website called Pursue and began releasing declassified files on unidentified anomalous phenomenon. 162 files, videos, photos, military reports going back to the 1940s on a .gov website. No clearance required. A woman who tried to research exotic propulsion in public is dead, and the government is now publishing UFO files in public. The question this episode is going to answer is not whether those two facts are connected. The question is, how do you think about whether they're connected? How do you process information this overwhelming, this contradictory, this emotional, without falling into a groove? 30 years ago, a man wrote a book about exactly this problem. His name was Carl Sagan. The book was called The Demon-Haunted World: Science as a Candle in the Dark. And inside it, he built something called the Baloney Detection Kit. This is the Sovereign Investigation, Volume 2. This is the Candle in the Dark.
You're listening to the Sovereign System, where the fringe meets the framework. This is a special investigation episode. If you're new here, welcome. You don't need to have heard the first 12 episodes to follow this one. But if you go back and listen to them after, everything you're about to hear will hit different. I'm John.
And I'm Dave.
And today we're doing something we've only done once before. We're going deep on a single story, and we're giving you a toolkit to process it. Not our opinions, not our conclusions, a toolkit. What you build with it is on you.
The story is the Pursue Files, the first ever mass release of declassified UFO records by the United States government. The toolkit is Carl Sagan's Baloney Detection Kit, the most elegant framework for critical thinking ever written by the man who spent his entire career wanting aliens to be real and still demanding proof.
And the person at the center of all of it is a 34-year-old scientist from Alabama who said her hands were being burned by an invisible weapon and then showed up dead. Her name was Amy Eskridge, and the FBI is now in 2026 investigating her death.
Let's go.
All right, Dave. May 8th, 2026, 4 days ago, as we record this, what happened?
The Department of Defense launched a website called Pursue. That stands for Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. It's hosted at a war.gov/UFO. And on that site, they published 162 declassified files, 120 PDF documents, 28 videos, 14 images, 82 from the Pentagon, 56 from the FBI, 12 from NASA, 8 from the State Department, 4 with the agency unidentified.
War.gov/UFO?
Yes.
The United States government has a website with the letters UFO in the URL?
On a .gov domain, yes.
Hold on, I need a moment here.
Take your time.
Okay. I mean, we've spent 12 episodes building a framework for how to think about things the system tells you aren't real. And the system just made a website about the thing it said wasn't real with a .gov ending. I feel like I showed up to a party that was supposed to be underground and the host put up a banner.
That's actually a great metaphor because the tension here is exactly that. Defense Secretary Pete Kegsbreth said the goal was, quote, maximum transparency. Director of the National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, described a, quote, comprehensive multi-agency declassification program. FBI Director Kash Patel called it a landmark release of UAP records. Trump posted on Truth Social telling people to decide for themselves what the hell is going on.
In all caps.
Of course, in all caps. But here's where it's getting interesting. NBC News reported that the documents, quotes, don't suggest any wide-ranging government cover-up of extraterrestrial encounters. The Pentagon's own disclaimer says the materials are unresolved cases, meaning the government is unable to make a definitive determination on the nature of the observed phenomena.
So they released 162 files and said, we don't know what these are, and said there's no cover up simultaneously.
And many of the files are still heavily redacted. One document, and I'm quoting NPR here, it contains the sentence 2x round white hot UAP's dynamic south after 6 pages that are completely blacked out.
So maximum transparency with 6 pages of minimum transparency right before the interesting part.
And this is the first tranche. They've said more files are coming on a rolling basis every few weeks, so this is the opening act.
Now, here's what I want to flag for our architects out there. Joe Rogan had Congressman Tim Burchett on his show the day before the release, and Burchett, who's been one of the biggest UAP disclosure advocates in Congress, said something really interesting. Rogan asked him, why now? Why is the government subtly doing this? And Burchett's answer was essentially, it might be a distraction from Iran, from other things the administration doesn't want you looking at.
And that's a legitimate hypothesis. It's actually what Carl Sagan would call the spin more than one hypothesis tool. We'll get to that. But the point is, even the people who want disclosure are questioning the timing and motive.
This is why you need the kit.
This is exactly why you need the kit.
Because right now, there are 3 grooves running. We talked about grooves in episode 9 with Michael Pollan and the default mode network. Groove 1, the government just admitted aliens are real, everything is changing. Groove 2, this is nothing, it's old photos and redacted pages. They're hiding the real stuff. And Groove 3, this is a distraction from Iran and tariffs and everything else.
And the sovereign response, what we've been building towards, is to catch the groove, run the pattern interrupt, and then engage the evidence, which brings us to the man who basically invented the process for the modern era.
Carl Sagan, for anybody who doesn't know, and if you don't know, you're about to become a fan. Carl Sagan was an astronomer, a planetary scientist, a cosmologist, and arguably the greatest science communicator who ever lived. He hosted the original Cosmos TV series in 1980. He helped NASA with the Voyager Golden Record, you know, the disc they put on the Voyager spacecraft with the sounds and images from Earth in case aliens find it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Star Trek Voyager, by the way. It's one of my favorites. He was also a co-founder of the Planetary Society and a central figure in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI. He spent his career looking for life beyond Earth. He wanted it to exist deeply, personally, and passionately.
But, and this is the important part,
He demanded evidence.
he demanded evidence. He's the guy who said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. He's the guy who looked at UFO reports his entire career and said, I want this to be real, and I will not pretend it's real until the evidence supports it. He is the original credible inquiry at the edge of what's known. He is literally our brand, Dave, before we existed.
Yep. In 1995, a year before he died, Sagan published a book called The Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. And inside, chapter 12, titled The Fine Art of Baloney Detection, he laid out what he called the Baloney Detection Kit, 9 tools for critical thinking, not to debunk things, not to dismiss things, to evaluate things. There's a massive difference.
And I love that word. The word is baloney. Not logically fallacy assessment framework. Baloney. The man who won the Pulitzer Prize, and he called it the Baloney Detection Kit. That's a man who understands his audience.
Let's walk through the 9 tools and show how they apply to everything happening right now. The Pursue files, the missing scientists, Amy Eskridge, all of it. So Sagan's 9 tools. Tool number 1. Whenever possible, there must be independent confirmation of the facts, not one source, no one person's claim, multiple independent sources confirming the same fact.
Apply that right now. The Pursue files, the Pentagon released them, but have independent analysts verified the contents? Have physicists looked at the radar data? Have aerospace engineers evaluated the flight characteristics described in the pilot reports? The government releasing something is not the same as the thing being confirmed. The release is step one. Independent confirmation is step two, and we're still on step one.
Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb, who runs the Galileo project specifically to study UAP using scientific instruments, said in a Medium post 2 days ago that this release is important, but the scientific community needs to independently analyze every piece of data, not just take the Pentagon's framing.
Sagan would have loved that guy.
Tool number 2. Encourage substantive debate on evidence by knowledgeable proponents of all points of view.
This is where the disclosure around the Pursue files is already failing. You've got the disclosure community saying this proves everything. You've got mainstream media saying there's no evidence of aliens. You've got very few people in the middle saying, let's actually sit down with the radar data and the flight reports and have a physicist and pilots and intelligence analysts look at it all together. The debate is happening on Twitter. Sagan wanted it happening in the labs.
Tool 3. Arguments from authority carry little weight. In science, there are no authorities. At most, there are experts.
This one cuts both ways, and I want our architects to hear that. When the Pentagon says these files don't indicate a cover up, that's an argument from authority. When a congressman says these deaths are connected, that's an argument from authority. When a retired intelligence officer says she was murdered, that's an argument from authority. None of those carry automatic weight. The evidence carries the weight. The chain of reasoning carries weight. The title of the person saying it does not.
And remember what we said in episode 4, the authority audit, replace experts say with I say. Does the claim still hold when it comes out of your mouth?
That's the overlap. Sagan would have gotten along great on this podcast.
Tool 4. Spin more than one hypothesis. Don't run with the first idea that caught your fancy.
This is the big one for the missing scientist story. The hypotheses on the table right now. 1. These are unconnected events that pattern-seeking minds are linking together. Robert Bartholomew, a medical sociologist, calls it apophenia, the tendency to see meaningful patterns in random data. 2. There is a coordinated effort by a state or non-state actor to neutralize researchers working on sensitive programs. 3. Some of these are connected and some aren't, and the truth is messier than either clean narrative. 4. The real story isn't the deaths themselves, but what the reaction to the deaths reveal about the institutional fragility. That's the Talib lens from episode 11.
Sagan would tell you to hold all 4 hypotheses simultaneously and see which one survives contact with the evidence. The sovereign move is not picking one, it's running all of them.
My brain hurts, but I love it.
Tool 5. Try not to get overly attached to a hypothesis just because it's yours.
Ooh, that's the hardest one. I mean, I'd be all about that if I came to a conclusion here. Because if you spent 12 episodes building a narrative about institutional suppression and disclosure and NHI, which, let's be honest, we have, then the temptation is to see every new data point as confirming that narrative that you've created. That'd be like me creating that narrative. That's a confirmation bias. And Sagan says your hypothesis is not your identity. You can change your mind without losing yourself. Which, episode 6, Carol Dweck, growth mindset. The sovereign mind isn't attached to conclusions, it's attached to the process of inquiry.
Tool 6, quantify. Put numbers on things wherever possible.
This is where the missing scientist story gets really interesting because Mick West, the skeptic researcher, made a quantitative argument. He pointed out that roughly 700,000 people hold active security clearances in the United States. At the national average death rate, you'd expect around 250 deaths per year in that population just from normal causes. CNN reported this framing in their April 30th analysis. So 11 cases over 4 years might actually be below the expected number.
But, and this is important, quantity isn't the whole story. Quality matters too. It's not just how many died, it's what specific combinations of fields, institutions, and circumstances characterize the ones who died. The Loureiro case, his murder was solved. FBI confirmed in April that it was a Portuguese national, Claudio Manuel Nunes Valente, acting alone, completely unrelated to his work. So at least one case falls off the list.
And that's Sagan working in real time. Independent confirmation and hypothesis gets tested. One case is explained. Does that mean all of them are explained? No. Does it mean none of them are suspicious? No. It means one data point is resolved and the remaining ones need their own analysis.
Tool 7. If there's a chain of argument, every link in the chain must work.
This one is about to become really important when we get to Amy Eskridge because the chain of argument in her case is long. And some links are steel, and some links are less than steel.
Tool 8. Occam's razor. If two hypotheses explain the data equally well, choose the simpler one.
But Sagan also warned about misusing Occam's razor. The simpler explanation isn't always the correct one. Sometimes reality is generally complicated. The simple explanation for the pursuit files is the government is being transparent. The more complicated explanation involves geopolitical timing, public distraction, controlled disclosure, and an institutional self preservation. Sometimes the complicated explanation is the right one. Occam's razor is a tiebreaker, not a law.
Tool 9. Always ask whether a hypothesis can, at least in principle, be falsified. If there's no test that could prove it wrong, it's not a scientific hypothesis. It might be something else, a belief, a hunch, a narrative, but it's not science.
And this is where the NHI question gets complicated because non human intelligence exists and it interacts with humans is falsifiable in principle. You could find definitive evidence, you could run tests, you could analyze materials, but a secret cabal is suppressing all evidence of NHIs is much harder to falsify because any lack of evidence can be attributed to the suppression itself. That's what Sagan would call unfalsifiable, and he'd flag it.
Which doesn't mean it's wrong. It means it requires a different standard of engagement, and that different standard, holding as inquiry rather than conclusion, is the sovereign position.
Now, I want to say something about Sagan that makes him different from every framework we've covered so far. Brown taught us vulnerability, Jocko taught us ownership, Poland taught us to catch the narrator, Voss taught us to hear the other side, Taleb taught us to get stronger from chaos. Sagan teaches us the thing underneath all of it, how to tell what's real from what we want to be real. And he does it with love. He's not sneering at people who believe in UFOs. He's saying, I want them to be real too. Let's find out together. But let's be honest with each other along the way.
There's a passage in the book, and this is probably the most important passage Sagan ever wrote. He talks about his parents who had died, and he says he desperately wishes he could talk to them again, that he dreams about them, that part of him wants to believe they're still somewhere. And then he says, and I'm paraphrasing here to keep it in our own words, that the human desire to believe in comforted things is not a flaw. It's what makes us human. But if we build our understanding of reality on comfort instead of evidence, we lose the ability to actually navigate reality. And that's when we become vulnerable, not Brown's kind of vulnerable, the dangerous kind.
Science is a candle in the dark. The candle doesn't eliminate the darkness, it lets you see where you're walking. Now let's jump back to the case with Amy Eskridge. All right, so we have the kit, the 9 tools. Now we're going to use the kit on a real case. And this is the case that I think matters the most right now. Not because it's the most famous, but because it's the most layered. It's the one where every tool in the kit gets tested.
Amy Catherine Eskridge, born 1988, chemistry degree from the University of Alabama in Huntsville, enrolled in the materials science PhD program at UAH, professional background in MEMS testing, that's microelectric mechanical systems, piezoelectric microcantilevers, non-viral polymetric drug delivery, and gene therapy research, also ran software consulting businesses. This was not a fringe person. This was a credentialed, multidisciplinary scientist.
Piezoelectric microcantilevers? I just want the architects to know I practiced that 14 times. It felt like 1,000 times. Dave just says these things like normal humans say sandwich. I have to run drills, okay?
All right, moving on. Eskridge co-founded two organizations with her father, Richard Eskridge, a retired NASA engineer and scientist. The first, Holochrone Engineering, a public benefit corporation specializing in, per their own documentation, quantum computing, gravity modification, metamaterial science, and communications. Started July 2019, dissolved in December of 2022. The second, the Institute for Exotic Science, also co-founded with her father, also a public benefit corporation. This is the important one. In 2020, a podcast interview with Jeremy Rise, Eskridge described the institution as, quote, a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology. She explicitly said she created it to be public because she believed visibility was her survival strategy.
All right, let me translate that for our architects using our framework. She was deploying a Taleb strategy, episode 11, anti-fragility through transparency. She understood intuitively or deliberately that secrecy made her vulnerable and publicity made her harder to silence. She was making herself a visible node in a distributed network. Episode 5, the mesh network concept. If something happened to her in a classified program, nobody would ever know. But if something happened to her as the president of a public research institution, people would notice.
And she said exactly that. Her quote, if you stick your neck out in private, they will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news. That's why the Institute exists.
This is chilling, and in retrospect,
Now, Sagan's tool number one, independent confirmation. What did Eskridge actually research? In December 2018, she gave a presentation titled A Historical Perspective on Anti-Gravity Technology to the Huntsville, Alabama L5 Society. That's HAL5, a local space advocacy group. The talk covered historical electrogravitics, the Bainfield-Brown effects, the superconductor-based gravity experiments, and modern claims about alleged black projects developing triangular anti-gravity craft, designated the TR-3 Bravo. Her father co-presented the slides, are publicly available as a PDF on HAL5's website. But yeah, no, the TR-3 Bravo launched in '95 out of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. It was one of our first alien reproduction vehicles that was actually seen by the public, although there were others. But yeah, Skunk Works and Lockheed, which, by the way, actually, I probably shouldn't say this, but um, there are speculation on who would be responsible for what happened to her, and considering Lockheed's the one that actually was trying to dispose of one of their recovered vehicles to Bigelow Aerospace and was denied by Central Intelligence Office of Global Access, who, by the way, works in conjunction with the Air Force's Special Investigations Unit, which would be the real Men in Black. So that was something that was kind of a big thing a few few months back. But anyways,
So a public talk, publicly archived, that's verifiable.
but here's where we apply the kit honestly. Sagan's tool number 7. Every link in the chain must work. The presentation was a historical survey. It discussed other people's experiments and claims. It did not represent or present Eskridge's own experimental results. And and this is the critical for, intellectual honesty. No peer-reviewed experimental papers, no patent records, no reproducible technical results from either the Institute or Holochrone have ever been identified in public sources. Her documented work consists of public talks, corporate materials, and media interviews, not formal scientific publications. A fact-checking assessment by factually.com confirmed this, although I will say, due to the Atomic Act of 1953, if a patent is determined to be a threat to national security, it can be and is classified and then put under lock and key. So there is a good chance that this is something that may have happened to especially antigravitics. This is a huge area where we absolutely do not discuss that publicly, and all work regarding antigravitic drives or anything of that sort is very, very much kept under lock and key.
So she was a credentialed scientist, but the specific anti gravity claims were not yet scientifically published.
Correct. That's an important link in the chain. It doesn't mean she didn't have results. It might mean she died before she could publish them. She said in 2020 that she needed NASA approval before presenting her foundational research. But the absence of published results means we can't independently verify the science. We can only evaluate the circumstances.
And the circumstances are where this story breaks your brain.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the directed energy weapon claims. Before her death, Eskridge contacted a retired British intelligence officer named Frank Milburn. She told him she was targeted for her work in propulsion technology. She claimed that she was being, quote, physically and psychologically attacked. She provided photos of discolored and burned hands. Resurfaced video published by Right Angle News Network on X in April of 2026 shows Eskridge saying, quote, my hands have been burned to hell and back, and described what she called a direct energy weapon. She said a colleague with the weapons experience identified the device as a RF K-band emitter powered by 5 car batteries inside of an SUV.
Okay, let's run the kit.
Go.
Tool 1, independent confirmation. Did we have independent confirmation that directed energy weapons capable of causing burns exist?
Well, interestingly enough, yes, actually. The existence of microwave-based directed energy weapons is not classified. The active denial system built by Raytheon, who I work for the US military, projects a 95 gigahertz millimeter wave beam that causes an intense burning sensation on human skin. It's been publicly demonstrated. K-band is 18 to 27 gigahertz. That's radar frequency range used in military communications and tracking. In principle, a high-powered K-band emitter at close range could definitely cause tissue damage. So the technology is real. The question is whether it was deployed against a specific person. But also, I want to remind people who may not be familiar with radar technologies is that even when we are our X-band or any other kind of band radar, you can't go near these things because of that exact reason. It causes horrific damage to human or any kind of biological tissue to begin with. Ask any service member what happens when you get too close to the wire when you have one of your X-band radars, on the wire. They get yelled at quite a bit because, yeah, there's no bueno.
Let's jump to tool 3, arguments from authority. What authorities have weighed in?
Congressman Eric Burson, Republican from Missouri, stated publicly that there is, quote, significant evidence Amy Eskridge was targeted by a directed energy weapon using microwave energy. He described her situation as consistent with Havana syndrome. Journalist Michael Schallenberger testified before Congress before a congressional hearing on UAP that Eskridge was, quote, murdered by a private aerospace company in the U.S. She was involved in the UAP conversation. Milburn submits his findings to Congress in 2023 and concluded her death was not a suicide.
But tool 3 again, Those are authorities making claims. What's the independent evidence?
And this is where the chain gets complicated. We have her own video testimony. We have photos she shared. We have Milburn's assessment. We have congressional statements. What we don't have is an independent medical examination of her burns by a physician unconnected to either side, a forensic analysis of the alleged RF device, or a police investigation that examined the directed energy claim. The coroner ruled suicide. The police closed the case. No public investigation report was ever released.
Let's jump to tool 4. Spin more than one hypothesis. What are the hypotheses here?
Hypothesis A, the family's position. Amy suffered from chronic pain and depression. She died by suicide. The conspiracy theories are painful and false. Her father said scientists die also, just like other people. Hypothesis B, Milburn's position. She was targeted by a directed energy weapon, harassed, and ultimately killed because her research threatened powerful interests. Her death was staged to look like a suicide. Or hypothesis C, the one nobody talks about, but that former FBI Assistant Director Andrew Black actually articulated on News Nation. The fact that her parents may feel that she did commit suicide doesn't mean that other things she reported weren't true. Maybe these things contributed to her taking her own life. In other words, both could be partially true. She may have genuinely been harassed and genuinely suffered from depression and chronic pain. The harassment may have worsened her mental health. The result would have been suicide that was caused, at least in part, by a sustained external pressure.
That's actually the most disturbing hypothesis because it means you can destroy someone without pulling the trigger. You can harass someone into doing it themselves.
And Sagan would say, hold all three, don't collapse into one because each one has evidence that supports it and evidence that doesn't.
I want to read one more thing she wrote. This is from private messages that Milburn published after her death. She said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly to keep it in our own words, that giving a CIA officer a headache in a hotel doesn't make strategic sense. The capability isn't worth exposing for that. But targeting a scientist with seizures every time she sits down to write about a certain topic, that effectively stops progress on that topic. She said her seizures and migraines coincided with her research deadlines.
Tool 9, falsifiability. Is that claim falsifiable?
Yes, you could, in principle, correlate her documented research activity with medical records showing neurological events. If the correlation held, seizures clustering around publication deadlines, that would be strong evidence. If it didn't hold, the claim weakens, but nobody has done that analysis publicly.
Which is why the FBI investigation matters. For the first time, there's an institution with the resources and the legal authority to actually run these tests. Whether they will or not is a different question.
Let's jump off to the Nexus, Huntsville, and the gravity question. Okay, so we've run the kit on Amy Eskridge individually. Now let's zoom out because Amy didn't exist in a vacuum. She existed in a specific city, in a specific research ecosystem, connected to specific people and programs, and the city is Huntsville, Alabama.
Huntsville is home to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, Redstone Arsenal, which is the U.S. Army's Rocket and Missile Development Center, and a massive defense contractor ecosystem. It has more engineers per capita than almost any city in America. It's where the Saturn V rocket was built. Werner von Braun worked there.
So when we talk about exotic propulsion research happening in Huntsville, that's not random. That's the place where American rocket science lives.
Yeah, and here's where the pattern deepens. Before Amy Eskridge, there was actually another physicist at the University of Alabama in Huntsville who worked on gravity modification. Her name was Dr. Ning Li. She was a Chinese-American physicist who published actual peer-reviewed work. This is key. This is the independent confirmation that Eskridge's work lacks on using rotating superconductors to generate gravitic magnetic fields. She received Department of Defense funding funding, and then in the early 2000s, she completely vanished from the public scientific life. No more papers, no more conferences, no public trace.
Same city, same university system, same field. One disappeared from public view, the other died.
Journalist Ross Coulthart of News Nation stated publicly that, quote, in Huntsville, Alabama, there's a very black program underway that was previously run by a Chinese American scientist called Ni Ling. There's a very active anti-gravity program. I'm told there's equally extraordinarily aggressive and nasty Chinese counterintelligence operations currently underway.
Let's run the kit on that claim. Tool 1, Independent Confirmation.
Ning Li's published research is independently confirmable. Her papers exist in physics journals. The DoD funding is documented. Her disappearance from public life is a fact, but Coulthart's claim about a specific very black program and a Chinese counterintelligence operation are single source claims from an investigative journalist citing unnamed sources.
Tool 3, Authority.
Coulthart is a credentialed investigative journalist, but he's still one person citing unnamed sources, high credibility individual, but specific claims need independent verification.
Tool 4, Multiple Hypotheses.
Hypothesis A. There is a classified gravity modification program in Huntsville. Neeling was involved, and it's a target of foreign intelligence. Hypothesis B. Neeling moved into classified work voluntarily, and the program is unremarkable defense research that gets exaggerated in the UAP community. Hypothesis C. The Huntsville nexus is a product of selection bias. Huntsville has a lot of defense scientists, so of course some of them are going to die or disappear, and we just noticed because we're looking.
I want to connect this to something we've never talked about on the show before, but that fits here. In the 1980s and early 1990s, and we covered this briefly in episode 12, at least 25 scientists working for the British defense contractor Baloney died under bizarre circumstances: electrocution, carbon monoxide. One man supposedly tied a rope around his neck, attached it to a tree, and drove away. The British government called it coincidence. No coordinated investigation was ever opened. That was 40 years ago.
And the Marconi scientists were working on electronic warfare and defense communications, not identical to Eskridge's anti-gravity work, but adjacent in the defense contractor ecosystem.
Sagan would say the Marconi precedent doesn't prove the American cases are connected, but it does demonstrates that this pattern has occurred before. It means the hypothesis of coordinated targeting of defense scientists is not unprecedented. It has historical precedent, and that matters when you're evaluating likelihood.
And I want to bring up the Pursue files back in here because one thing the Pentagon's 2025 UAP workshop report, which was quietly declassified on May 6th, 2 days before the Pursue launch, explicitly discusses is the need to build permanent data infrastructure for UAP analysis. They talk about AI analysis, machine learning for pattern matching, pilot stigma suppressing reports. The Nimitz case, where critical records were lost due to weak retention policies, or maybe it was because the Tic Tac is actually Lockheed Martin's craft. Didn't say that. They are building an architecture for studying this phenomenon long term.
So while scientists who may have been studying related phenomena are dying or disappearing, the government is building a permanent infrastructure to study the same phenomena publicly?
That's tension. That's the contradiction that the Baloney detection kit helps you hold without collapsing into a simple narrative.
Now let's jump over to the sovereign detection protocol. Okay, so we've run Sagan's kit. We've applied it to the Pursue files, to Amy Extridge, to the Huntsville Nexus. And what I want to know is what we always do: build the tool, give our architects something they can use.
In episode 12, we introduced the Sovereign Inquiry Protocol. 5 questions, one from each framework. What's fragile here? Who's really at the table? What groove am I in? What's my 2%? Am I wearing armor or being brave?
The episode, we're adding a sixth layer, the Sovereign Detection Protocol. Sagan's kit, merged with everything we've built. Here's how it works. When you encounter any claim, whether it's a pursue file, a news story, a social media post, a friend's theory, anything, you run 7 questions. The first 5 are the Sovereign Inquiry Protocol. You already have those. The 6th and 7th are Sagan.
Question 6. Can this claim be independently confirmed by someone who doesn't already agree with it?
That's Sagan's tool 1 and tool 2 combined. Not does someone who already believes this agree. That's easy. You can always find agreement. The question is, can someone skeptical verify it? Can the evidence survive contact with a hostile audience?
Question 7. Can this claim, at least in principle, be proven wrong? And what would that proof look like?
That's Sagan's tool 9, falsifiability. If you can't even imagine what evidence would change your mind, you're not investigating. You're believing, and believing is fine in your personal life, in your spiritual life, in your relationships. But when you're trying to understand what's happening in the world, believing without falsifiability is the identity cage from episode 5. You've locked yourself in.
So the complete sovereign detection protocol is 1. What's fragile here? From Taleb, what system breaks if this information is true? 2. Who's really at the table? Voss, who benefits from this narrative? Who benefits from the counter narrative? 3. What groove am I in? From Poland. Am I running a confirmation loop? Is my DMN already decided? 4. What's my 2%? Jocko. What's my responsibility here? Am I outsourcing my thinking? 5. Am I wearing armor or being brave? From Brown. Is my certainty protecting me from the vulnerability of not knowing? 6. Can a skeptic verify this? From Sagan. Not a fellow believer, a skeptic. Can the evidence survive hostile scrutiny? 7. What would change my mind? Sagan. If I can't answer this question, I've left inquiry and entered belief.
7 questions, 6 frameworks, 12 episodes of tools stacked into a single protocol that works on anything. The Pursue files, Amy Extridge, the news, your job, your relationship, a sales pitch, a political speech, a conspiracy theory, a scientific paper, a government press release. It works on everything because it doesn't tell you what to think, it tells you how to think.
And I want to point out something. Sagan's edition does something none of the other frameworks do alone. Brown gives you emotional courage. Jocko gives you ownership. Poland gives you self-awareness. Voss gives you empathy. Taleb gives you anti-fragility. But Sagan gives you epistemology, the way of knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. Without that foundation, all the courage and ownership and empathy in the world can lead you confidently in the wrong direction.
Sagan is the foundation. He's not the newest tool in the toolbox. He's the workbench the toolbox sits on. Now let's go ahead and jump into our sovereign win and the sovereign win time homework for the week.
This week's sovereign win is called the detection audit. Here's the assignment. Go to war.gov/UFO. Yes, the real URL. Pick one file, any file, read it, and then run the sovereign detection protocol, all 7 questions, on that single file. Write your answers down, not in your head, on paper or in a notes app. The act of writing forces precision. Your brain can hand wave, your pen can't.
And then, this is the hard part, find someone who disagrees with your conclusion and run the protocol with them. Not to argue, to rumble. Episode 7. The story I'm making up is use the tool, see what happens.
That's the sovereign detection protocol in action. It only works if you actually use it.
Now, before we close, I want to go back to Amy Extridge for a moment.
Go.
She was 34. She was a scientist. She loved this stuff, the weird, fringe, boundary pushing science that most people laugh at. She could have done her research quietly in a classified program behind locked doors. Instead, she built a public institution. She gave public talks. She went on podcasts. She put her name on it because she believed that visibility was protection. She believed that if people knew who she was and what she was working on, it would be harder for someone to silence her. She was 34 And she said, if you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. We notice, Amy. 4 days ago, the United States government started putting its UFO files on a public website. We don't know yet what those files mean. We don't know if they're the beginning of real disclosure or the most elaborate distraction ever created. We don't know what happened to Amy Eskridge. Not really, not fully, not in a way that every link in the chain holds up. We don't know what's in Huntsville. We don't know what the Pursue files will look like in 6 months when more tranches drop. But we know how to think about it. We have the kit, we have the protocol, we have 12 episodes of framework stacked into a single operating system for navigating a world that is getting weirder every single week. Carl Sagan died in 1996. He never saw the Pentagon release UAP files on a .gov website. He never saw a congressman say directed energy weapon on the floor of the House. He never saw the FBI open an investigation into dead and missing scientists connected to UAP research. But he saw it coming. He saw all of it coming, because the very last thing he wrote in the demon-haunted world was a warning, a prediction about a time when people would be unable to tell what's true, when they'd grasp at comforting fantasies, when the tools of critical thinking would be lost. He called it sliding back into darkness. This show is the candle. You, the architects, listening right now, you are the candle. Not because you have the answers, because you're willing to hold the light steady while the questions get harder.
Be the architect.
The Sovereign Investigation Volume 2, The Candle in the Dark. See you next week, assuming we're all still here. That was a joke, mostly.